I will apologize in advance for the imagery, but I was shirtless at the dump. I was at the city dump and I was unloading a trailer full of construction debris that we had taken from the projects that we're doing at our house. Now, it was a wet day. The ground was wet. The stuff in the trailer was wet. And so here I was at the city dump, and I had decided to unload this trailer and not wear a shirt. Now, it's bad enough that I have all these abdominal scars from the multiple times they've unzipped me and field dressed me like a deer, but I'm also, I'm also a fuzzy little dude. Every morning I walk into the bathroom and that middle-aged man scares me. Get out of my bathroom. And by the way, sir, where can I get one of those sweaters? I've been known to tease teenagers when they make fun of the fact that I don't have any hair on my head and say, look here, son, I've got hair in places you ain't even got places. So here I am at the city dump, unloading construction debris. And yes, as hard as it is to picture, I am shirtless. A guy in a professional truck and trailer combo backs in right beside me. I'm standing there throwing things out of the trailer, and he gets out. He's in a professional construction worker T-shirt with the company logo on it. He walks around the corner of the trailer that he's backed into this place, and he stops and he looks at me. I pick up a 4x8 piece of sheetrock over my head, and I walk through the mud and I throw it onto the pile that I'm building. He pulls the pin out from the doors of his trailer so it can swing open. And then as he walks up to the front of his truck to grab the lever that controls the hydraulic, he just simply looks at me and says, so, is this your vacation? I said, no, I'm not on vacation. I'm not on vacation. I just didn't want to ruin my shirt. Who does this kind of stuff on their vacation? A similar thing happened to me when my brother and I were camping at Fall Creek Falls. For a number of years, I would go up and be the guest speaker and the resource person for a middle school retreat from Middle Tennessee Christian schools. They would come in and stay at the lodge or stay at the group camp, and they would stay there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. They'd depart at noon on Wednesdays. I'd go up on Monday and join them, and like I said, I would run games and do experience-based learning and speak. And then when they would leave at noon, I would go to one of the campsites, and my brother would come up from Montgomery and join me, and we would adventure and climb and explore in the park. And so we're here. We're setting up our camp. My brother has got a tent to sleep in, and I was driving in a Isuzu Amigo, a little white canvas top Jeep truck combination thing, and it didn't have a back seat. And so I had taken this flat pseudo truck bed and I had built a platform. I had taken some 2x4s and some 2x6s, and it made me this raised little platform with a sheet of plywood, and I put a mattress on it and my sleeping bag on it, and that's what I camped out in. But underneath this little platform, I had all this empty space, so I had put, ropes and tools and sterno cans and all kinds of things. We're here setting up our camp, and as we're getting the camp set up, we get this prevailing wind, and the weather starts cooling off. Now, in those days, there were no phones and no weather apps, and there was no 24-hour weather channel. You just went and did what you did, and the weather either cooperated or it didn't. The weather either changed or it didn't. The weather either helped you or it hurt you. And so we're at our campsite, and all of a sudden, it starts to cool off. We start looking around for some firewood. Now, we've got enough little wood there that we can cook on, but we really don't have the kind of wood that you're going to need to stay warm. And in a state park, you're not allowed to cut trees. You're not allowed to cut limbs. But anything that's fallen, anything that's already deadfall, you can have access to. Well, it just so happened that right before we had gotten up there, maybe even a couple of weeks before that, there had been some storm damage, and there had some trees had been knocked down in the campground, and the camp service people had cut these trees up into logs and, not manageable sections, but they weren't unmanageable either. So we have these big round sections of trees, and they're just not small enough to build, a campfire out of. But I had underneath the little thing in my truck, I had a splitting maul. I had about a 10 to 12 pound maul. A splitting maul has like a sledgehammer head on one side and then a sharpened blade on the other. And so we start rolling these logs into our campsite, standing up on the end, and I began to split them as I had been taught to split by Lamar Harbin. Harbin was this guy that kind of worked as our Bible class teacher and one of the guys that was sort of like our youth leader when we were kids at church. And Lamar was an absolute country strong, raw boned guy. And he taught me how to split wood using one of these mauls. And using a splitting maul is about technique and physics. It's not about raw strength. It's not about raw power. And if you turn the wood right and you can read the little X that shows you where the grain of the wood is, and you bring that maul up over your head and let the weight of the hammerhead, drive that point into the wood, the wood would jump apart. And so here I am in this campsite, and I'm taking these big logs and I'm turning them into halves, and then I'm turning the halves into quarters, and we're just, splitting wood going and coming. About a campsite over, and there's not a lot of people camping this time of year, my brother and I, but there's one campsite empty, and then the next campsite, there are these young people, probably college age, and they're camping nearby, and it's two boys and two girls. And you could tell, obviously, they were unprepared for the weather event. So I went over and asked them. I just was being nosy, and I said, hey, do you guys have any firewood? And he goes, we've got wood here, but we can't burn it. It's not manageable for us. So I started turning some of their logs over, standing them on the end, and would split them apart with the maul. And I split enough wood for these guys that they could, have a nice campfire and probably get them through the night. And these guys had never used a splitting maul, and they were unashamed. They said, hey, we don't know how to use that thing. We've never split any wood. I was pretty good at splitting wood. When Jackie and I lived in Salem, Arkansas, we heated our house. The house that we lived in was the parsonage. That means it's a house that the church owns, that they let the minister live in. And somebody in their wisdom had decided, it'd be more economical for the church if they didn't have to pay these huge heating bills. And we let this guy heat his house with wood. Well, that meant the guy who lived in the house, me, had to find wood, and they weren't paying me enough to buy wood. So I worked with a guy named John Moore, who had a wood splitting company or a wood cutting company. And I would go spend a couple of days a week with him to gather my own wood. And then I'd pile it up in the yard and I would split it. And I got really good at splitting wood. Splitting wood's very, very therapeutic, if not somewhat unchristian, because you stand a piece of wood on its end, you look at it, and you picture the face of the difficult congregant, and you bring that maul crashing down into it. Like I say, very therapeutic, if not a little bit unchristian. And there was one particular guy who got a lot of reps, but that's a different story. Anyway, here I am at this campground, and I'm in my probably mid-30s, and I'm feeling like a seasoned veteran woodsman around these college-age young people. Well, we lived through the night. We didn't freeze to death. And the next morning, Gerald and I got up and we started our fire, and we wrapped some potatoes in some aluminum foil, and we buried them inside the ashes of the fire so they can slow cook. And when we come back to camp for lunch, we'll have something ready to eat. And we're getting ready to go explore the park. Well, I look up, and standing in the gap between the two campsites is Captain Coed. He's standing there in what looks like maybe his pajamas, and he's motioning for me, and he's not being really loud, but I walked over to him, and he said, hey, could I borrow your wood chopper? And I said, you guys need some more firewood split? I'll be glad to come over and help you guys out. And he said, no, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to borrow that thing. My girlfriend thought it was cool the way you were breaking up those logs, and I'd like to try to impress her. Well, now I'm always willing to help a young man impress a young lady, so I gave him the splitting maul, and Gerald and I went off adventuring. Somewhere around lunch or 1 o'clock, we returned to camp. We're ready to eat. And as we returned to camp, there lies the handle of my splitting maul and the head of the splitting maul, and they are not connected. They're lying on top of our picnic table in our campsite. This kid had successfully beaten the handle out of my maul. Now, you got to understand, this young man was not strong enough to swing this maul and miss-hit one time and break it. This means he's had to hit this thing a multiple number of times in order to destroy this handle. Now, what's happening is he's trying to bring the head of this maul into the center of a piece of wood, and he's missing it not by missing and hitting the ground. He's overreaching, and the handle is hitting the wood, and the head of the maul is on the other side of the wood. And so you just keep striking and striking and striking the same spot. And he'd done this mistake. He'd repeated this mistake with a number of times and with enough force that he'd broken a hickory handle out of my splitting maul. Absolutely a rookie mistake. And the rookie mistake was not made by the would-be Paul Bunyan, but the rookie mistake was made by me by letting the little guy who wanted to play Paul Bunyan break my splitting maul in half trying to impress a girl. Well, we've got 2 more days to be in camp. And now we've got to have some way to get wood. And so I've got to repair this maul. Just outside the entrance of Fall Creek Falls State Park is a little general store. And by general store, I mean a general purpose, all-purpose store. A little wooden-sided building with a porch and steps you walk up, and they sold camping gear, they sold fishing gear, they sold groceries, they sold hardware, and they sold tools. So I head out to this little store while my brother is preparing our lunch. I walk into the store holding the head of this splitting maul, and I looked at the proprietor and I said, I've got to buy a new handle for my maul. And he said, oh, you must be with that crew out of so-and-so who's up here clearing the power lines. And I said, no, sir, I'm not clearing any power lines. I'm up here on vacation. And he just stopped in his tracks and looked at me and said, if this is what you do for vacation, I'd hate to go to work with you. I had to reflect and say, who brings a splitting maul on their vacation? I hadn't really stopped to consider that some of the things I did for fun, other people might consider to be hard work. And I had learned that there were lots of things that were hard for me that were very easy for other people. The kinds of things that Jackie's dad could do, the things he could build or make or repair that I had no idea how to do when Jackie and I first got married, and he taught me. And he had an incredible work ethic. He'd worked in the oil fields as a roughneck, and he did some climbing around steel structures when he was a professional painter. And her brother Shane is one of the most hardworking guys I know. The last time I was in Arkansas and visiting, I was speaking at one event, was going to have a day off, and then travel and speak at another event in the same state, a couple of hours apart. On my day off, Shane and I spent that day pulling stumps out of his yard. And it was fun. We worked for 4 or 5 hours getting these stumps out of his yard, using my rope gear and using my pulleys and using an old retired tree rope. And at the end of the day, we're sitting on the tailgate of the truck. We're watching the sun go down. And Shane commented, he said, this probably wasn't how you wanted to spend your day off, but I think it's really enjoyable to work with your hands and get to see what you've accomplished. And I had to agree. It might have been hard work, but it was also fun. I got to cooperate. We got to problem solve. I got to use my ropes. I got to use the mechanical advantage. I got to use my pulleys and the friction knots. I'd learned how to use all these rope systems and mechanical advantage in a 3-day seminar that I'd attended at Berry College. It was called Rope Technician Level 1. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a single-day seminar or a multi-day seminar just to collect the experiences. I learned to do single rope technique at a camp at Black Mountain, North Carolina, at a tree climbing seminar. And I've spent the day with people doing their job just so I could learn the tricks of the trade. Because you see, you can spend years learning how to use a chainsaw, or you can spend one day with a guy who uses a chainsaw every day, and it'll make up for you not using a chainsaw for a number of years. And you can learn things that you could only learn by using a chainsaw for years. It's so valuable to collect experiences from experienced people. One of the things I try to do, since I can't train on a regular basis in jiu-jitsu, is go to a weekend seminar or even take a private lesson. Spending one-on-one, just one lesson with somebody like Brandon McGathern or Matt Scaff or Brendan Messick or Chuck Mitchell. You spend one day with those guys and you learn from them in a day what it took them months to learn or develop. Spend one day with Ed Marshman taking one of his pistol classes, or just spend a half a day on the range with a guy like Jason Brightwell. You gain experience from an immersive experience or an intensive seminar, and you progress in your skill level so much further than you would in in weeks or months of just learning this stuff on your own. They already know the mistakes you make. They watch for those mistakes, and they already know the tricks of the trade to advance your skill level or advance your efficiency far, far greater than that. You've heard me say before that I define a problem as a lack of resources. The young man next to us did not have a maul. He had a problem. He didn't have what he needed to cut wood. I also define a dysfunction as a misuse of resources. So he had access to a maul. He had access to my axe, but he didn't have the experience to use it. And if he'd asked me to teach him to use it, he wouldn't have destroyed it. But since he didn't gain from my experience, he had a bad experience. As important it is to have experiences, we need people in our lives with experience. We need to surround ourselves with people who are experienced. We need people in our lives to either help us supply the resources or teach us to use the resources we already have. I was on another retreat years and years ago, and it was my habit to get up on Saturday mornings and go for a little run. And a young man named Justin Birdwell said, "Hey, in the morning when you go for a run, can I go with you?" I didn't think about what level of runner he was or what level of runner I was, but he was wearing a T-shirt when he came out to run that morning, and his shirt simply said, "My sport is your sport's punishment." He was a state record holder as a cross-country runner, and his shirt essentially said, "I do for fun what they make you do in order to punish you. The thing that you dread, the thing that you hate, the thing that you consider to be terrible is the thing that I do for fun." As valuable as experiences are, you need to surround yourself with people who are experienced. You need to surround yourself with people of experience. The things that we think are hard or impossible are sometimes like play. They're like recreation. They're like vacation for those who have a vast level of experience. What we might think is too hard is a normal day or an easy day or even an off day for them. When people come to therapy all the time and they're overwhelmed with this new thing that they have got to navigate in their life. And I try to explain it this way, especially when people are uncomfortable about quote unquote needing to see a therapist. As a therapist, I see these kinds of situations regularly. I see marriages that are in trouble. I deal with people who've experienced trauma or grief or loss. I deal with people who have anxiety. And I explain it this way. If I have a problem with my truck and my truck needs a new transmission, that is a life-altering experience for me. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm way in over my head and I'm overwhelmed. But the guy at the transmission shop probably rebuilds 2 or 3 transmissions in a week. You've come to the counselor's office because I have plenty of experience with what is your new experience. And what you think may be difficult or hard is so familiar as if not to be easy, at least it's simple to deal with. The best experiences are experienced by surrounding yourselves with those who have experience. Getting advice in your marriage, not from a therapist, but from people who've been married for 25, 30, or 40 years. Learning how to navigate your job by a senior guy. Learning how to deal with your children by people who have raised their children. Learning how to do a sport by a guy who's accomplished in the sport. It's so valuable to surround ourselves with mentors, to learn the thing that we're trying to learn to navigate the thing we're trying to navigate from those who've already figured out the science, who've already figured out the tricks of the trade, and who've done it enough times, and for the amount of time that to them it's really easy. And if you watch them, it looks really easy. And that's sports, that's work, that's technique, that's relationships, that's crisis, that's grief, that marriage, that's fitness, that's finances, that's everything in life. It's not just having the experience, but finding people who are experienced. And if we just use that simple knowledge, if we use that simple thing to look at the people who already know and already know how or know what to expect, if we could surround ourselves with the experienced, then when we have to experience the difficult things in life, those things that before we surrounded ourselves with the knowledgeable people, with the experienced people, before we were surrounded by those resources in our lives that could help us to learn to use our resources more efficiently and more effectively, if we could do that, then the things in life that look difficult, the things that look hard, or even the things that when we first encounter them may feel like they're impossible, if we relied on the experiences of the experienced, we'd do those things, we'd navigate those things, and it would feel like we were on vacation.